Lamar Jackson is one of the lesser talked about players, but yet one of the more pivotal ones in terms of dynasty evaluation and prognostication in the offseason to what he is actually doing now off of his massive breakout season and, frankly, an NFL and dynasty changing one in 2019. But here we are most of the way through 2020, and Lamar Jackson has been glaringly inefficient and underproductive compared to expectations. Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons, joined by Jordan McNamara. And Jordan, we are going to do a player feature here for a chunk of the show. We'll see how long it goes. As is usual, don't have 14 things on the docket because we know that would be in folly. But Lamar Jackson was one. You mentioned a Rorschach test, and frankly, he was a Rorschach test going back to a prospect. He was a very divisive. You still have the memes and the quotes and all those things that he was viewed as not a quarterback prospect by some. He went in the late first round, as late as Clyde Edwards-Helaire, final pick of the round. And so that in quarterback land means tread lightly, because this is no sure thing, because sure things aren't even at 101 and not even in the top half, but those are way better bets than 32 overall. We get Lamar Jackson flashing a little bit in his first season, but barely playing. We get a massive breakout where he's changing the game and not going to the Super Bowl, but Tennessee, hems him down, the whole mantra of he can't play from behind. And we've seen that Baltimore is underwhelmed this year in general. There's a number of points that he has just been a pretty big disappointment. Yet I don't hear fantasy-wise many people talking about him as such.
Yeah, and this is a classic case of what you paid, right? Last year it was such a massive season, and you paid a not massive price for him, and now you paid top 4 picks in a Superflex startup draft, and now he's disappointing. I keep going back to last year's Superflex drafts, and this is going to be one of those things that will go with me for a long time. That Patrick Mahomes was such a clear-cut 101, and that got clouded out in terms of like McCaffrey and Barkley and Lamar Jackson, and there were points where Mahomes went 104. That was a mistake that we need to learn from in terms of I think Lamar Jackson's a good proxy for a lot of things, and I'll just start with regression to the mean. I mean, when you look at some of his stuff last year, right, when we talk about unsustainability of stats, and we talk about, right, like he's still a fantasy starter this year. Now, granted, there's no Dak, right? So we've lost some of the juice there up at the top, but he's still a fantasy starter. So as context, but when you sort of look at some of his stats from last year and compare to this year, I mean, 9% touchdown rate, right? That's basically 3 standard deviations above the normal, which is absolutely totally unsustainable, right? And so that's one thing that you just make a bet against, right? I mean, that's just not going to happen. That's just not going to back it up. Historically,
because the best players at the position of all time regress back from numbers like that. And this is a player we had and still had during, before that and during it, of saying, is he really that good of a passer? And like Cam Newton, right? Didn't we see that magical 35 or so touchdown year? They went to the Super Bowl. Every deep ball to Ted Ginn, etc., was being completed, and they get all the way to the Super Bowl. And he was not close to that the rest of his career. Why? He had the magical year, and he frankly wasn't that great of a passer. He had the perfect storm. Lamar Jackson, 2019, had the perfect storm as a passer.
Yeah, for sure. And there's been 11 quarterbacks in my sample that have gone north of 2 standard deviations above the average touchdown rate. And the average regression is basically they drop 2.5%. Right, they drop back to 5.3%, which and their average is 7.8%. So Lamar Jackson was north of that in terms of throwing more touchdowns per attempt than you would expect by a huge margin last year. And now he's exactly back to what they average on regress to. Right, he is at 5.4. The historical is 5.3. Right, so this is stuff that we could have absolutely.
Well, this is like a guy going for 6.5 yards per carry, right? at a running back. Like,
right.
oh, he must have broken a bunch of long runs. Offensive line must have been healthy and or playing great, and so many reasons for it. And oh, he wasn't dinged up very many games or as much as a typical running back might be. Or there's so many little ancillary fuzzy reasons, but it comes down to that final number. And that's why you typically, they have regression formulas. Like you just said, I mean, running backs, it's like, I can't remember what it is. The average is is it 4.0 or 4.2? I can't remember, but it's like you do a certain percentage of the baseline for the NFL and what they did last year. And that's why the guys that average 3.0 and still have a job the next year, probably going up. And the guys that average 5.5, probably coming down. And it works like 90 something percent of the time in a pretty graphic and meaningful way.
Yeah. And I just think it's a classic. Like we could have and did talk about this happening, right? A lot of it is just touchdown rate, right? When you sort of look and boil down some of the other numbers, right? He's way down in yards per attempt. Last year, he was way over league average. This year, he's below it. So that's I think a big one in terms of he was 7.8 yards per attempt last year. He's down to 7.1. And the yards per attempt number is actually up in the NFL this year, right? So that's when you look at interception rates up, right? All of these things is what happens to the quarterback one, right? Like this shouldn't have been unexpected. Those are historical years because they're to do it. It just takes such a massive outlier to actually get to quarterback one that almost definitionally you're going to regress. I think the only person ever bounced back is Dante Culpepper, and that was like almost 2 decades ago now. So, rebound at quarterback one. So it's just a really tough thing to do. And for me, it was always, all right, you're investing at this person at their height, and going in that almost like for certain that they're not going to, that they're going to be drop in value. Right. And that they're going to be that they're
much.
not. Yeah. It was a how much situation. Right. For sure. And so it just didn't make sense. Right. So some of the other guys that we talked about and, it didn't work out for other reasons, but like Dak, at least they had room to go up from their cost. Right. You were basically betting on the opposite happening, which was his regression going in a more favorable direction. And it was to some degree before he got hurt. I mean, he was injured as the quarterback one.
I guess bigger volume is the other thing, right? I mean, you can drop in touchdown rate, but your volume's got to go up. He was one of the lowest volume quarterbacks, but that's not really the nature of the offense. Like you're not saying This is a guy that's going to throw 40 plus times a week. And that's certainly, everyone's pointing to, that's exactly how you want Baltimore to play. That would be the game script. That would be the prescription, for this illness, which is getting run over by the Ravens run game. Let's get him to throw from the pocket. And we've seen a number of times this year, teams are figuring out how to do that. They're equipped and schematically they're hemming him into the pocket where if you see him drop back and he doesn't venture from the pocket and he throws a pass, like that is a big win on defense. And we've seen that within games, but also for most of games where he still has that flaw. And to be fair, and this is something I mentioned for about 6 straight years of shows of talking about Cam Newton. And I said, at some point you have to progress to a quality passer that can drop back and win and carve people up on third down. And at some point, you have to win from the pocket within timing and structure. Greg Cosell says that all the time when he's scouting quarterbacks and talking about them in the NFL, mid-career, etc. And Cam Newton, he never really did that. He had that one magic year, but we still, a decade later, however long it's been, still have that question. And Lamar Jackson, we're now, we're going to be 2 seasons plus his glorified red shirt. We still are going to have that. We still have that question. And to be fair, I don't think this is something we're going to look back in 5 years and be like, remember how he was just slow progress? Because let me ask you this. Is Josh Allen actually being the outlier to this, not theory, but this overarching, let's put this blanket across the position and say, you really can't change from being a run-centric guy and you kind of get by okay as a passer to all of a sudden now you're more of a passing guy? Is he going to be the one name you can kind of throw into this and go, well, maybe you're Josh Allen, though?
I mean, yeah, maybe, right? And I don't even feel great about Josh Allen, right? In terms
Feel
of
good about Stephon Diggs. I know I've talked to you casually. You're like, Stephon Diggs was such a great acquisition. It might have saved Josh Allen's career arc.
Yeah, I feel really good about him. And I mean, I feel really good about their offense, right? And I feel really good about the way that they I'm interested in the Josh Allen career arc because it's too small of a sample to really feel great about drawing huge huge threads from. But I would say, like, in defense of Josh Allen in college, right? He was a very, very late bloomer as a quarterback. And I think, if memory serves, like, he didn't play quarterback until he was like a junior in high school. And then sort of went kind of an off the beaten path route to being an NFL quarterback. But you have seen sort of him develop. And so you've seen the footwork and all of the, all the touch throws and all of those things that you would kind of expect for a high quarterback to already possess. He didn't, but you've seen some growth in that, right? So I guess that would be, I mean, if you're looking for a career arc to sort of jump onto that, hey, you can get a lot better as a passer, right? Maybe it's kind of the, he's not a molded piece of clay, right? I mean, and that's sort of, there was a lot of room to grow there for him. So, but you don't typically see a big development as a passer. I'll say, though, that they have done a lot of a lot of high efficiency stuff to help him develop, right? Throw out on first down, make easy stuff, get him in the shotgun on early downs and spread formations, right? Do a lot of things that we know historically have been really good to help quarterbacks develop. Baltimore's not doing that with Lamar Jackson, right? They want to go about it a different way, which is fine. But I think to maybe think that he's going to be this big time evolver in some of the passing game stuff, it's probably not really what they're aiming for, right? And so I think looking at those two a little bit differently, I feel more hopeful in terms of Josh Allen that he's actually turned the page on being a better quarterback than I do Lamar Jackson. And a lot of that is the faith that they've placed in Josh Allen, right? That I think when coaches, like, we see this with some players, like, hey, why don't coaches play player X, or why don't they give player Y more carries, or why is this guy still riding the bench? Like Cam Akers is a good example of this, right? Well, we only see Sundays, right, or Saturdays or Mondays or Tuesdays even this year, or Thursdays, I guess. We only see the game, right? We don't see a lot of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And I think when you look at how coaches use players, it gives you some indication of that. And that's, I think with Josh Allen, we have seen sort of the growth from him, and they've entrusted him. And that, I think the lack of that with Baltimore, I think, might tell us something about Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I actually didn't go through any of my bullet points on Lamar Jackson yet.
Oh boy,
because you were running
time, Chad.
Because you were running with it, and I knew when I brought up Josh Allen in quasi passing that it wasn't going to be a 2 bullet point answer for you, because it rarely is, and that's a good thing. So my touchdown regression database, and I kind of look at comps and rates and ranges and all this stuff. It was interesting because I made a note on all of the sort of regression-worthy, positively and negatively quarterbacks, and kept them. I wanted to kind of go back and see. And when I started thinking about Lamar Jackson as a topic for this week, and a good, again, litmus test and kind of jumping off point for a lot of things, dynasty-wise, and especially with quarterbacks, I wanted to see, because I knew he was a hot button guy that I almost, when you type it sometimes, you do your quarterback regression article, and you post in bright lights Lamar Jackson, after you just set the league on fire. It's like, that's probably going to turn some heads, in terms of readers and saying, really, you're calling out, the guy that changed the game and kind of all this stuff. But it actually said, so this database, it said minus 12 touchdowns through the air this year. And what's funny is he had 36 last year. And so that the minus 12 would be 24 for 16 games. He's on exactly 24 pace, Jordan. Yeah. Exactly, to hit the number. And I think, that's basically what you said, which is, the league average is 5.3, I think you said, and then he's at 5.4. I mean, he's right there basically and this kind of points to, hey, you're going to come crashing down from an elite level to largely average. And that it wasn't just that. He's operating from lower volume too. So it's regressing to, I'm sure my number was based on he's going to go to a higher touchdown rate, regress to that number that's higher than what you just said or what he is doing. But again, just a different volume number. So again, he's basically on that for 24. So 24, you better be a big time runner. He is, but he's actually down about 300 rushing yard pace for a 16 game slate here. And we're more than half a season in. And he's on pace for 4.8 rushing touchdowns compared to 7 last year. So the rushing is down. The rushing efficiency, the rushing scores, 12 touchdowns off the top. I mean, he has only 4 out of 10 games with 200 plus yards. This is today's NFL. 200 yards passing. Like that is a backup levels number of like, man, they had some garbage time. They got over 200. Yeah, they should. I mean, that means nothing in today's NFL, right? I mean, in college, 200 means nothing these days. He's had one game over 250 yards and just one game with 3+ passing touchdowns. So he's been completely forgettable as a passer. He's QB 11 in total points and QB 13 in points per game. I mean, that's similar to Gardner Minshew when he was playing. Drew Brees, he's behind Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, Tannehill, and Rodgers. All guys that, to some level, maybe not Tannehill, but the other guys are old and left for dead in fantasy terms, and especially in Superflex, right? I mean, we were talking between us as Aaron Rodgers in the offseason. It's like you were either buying the knife falling down if you believe all the market. The market talk about Aaron Rodgers, especially in Superflex, but otherwise you could have been, one of the smart guys in the room going, you're fading this guy, Aaron Rodgers. I'm getting the best deal I have in like a decade on Aaron Rodgers. You're telling me right now this season. Okay, I'm in. Okay. Like, so he's QB 18 over the past month. This is the transcendent 101, 102, 103 startup Superflex guy that's not been durability. I keep saying he's taken some rocket shots, and that hasn't been an issue. He pops up every time. So we haven't even talked about if that ever occurs. If an injury, RG3 like Michael Vick lost 2 early seasons with injuries, we haven't even that hasn't even factored in. This is just playing erosion and regression after a year where, again, defense, what are the defenses going to do? They're going to key on how to stop you. And you're very specific. It's more difficult to stop a quarterback that is just carving you from the pocket. I think that's more difficult to stop than, okay, we'd like to keep this guy in the pocket and really let's just get him to throw. Let's get him to throw, from the timing and rhythm of this offense, or get him to not throw, and create big plays when he has run pass fusion and options, from outside the pocket. So this is a guy that has been forgettable this year. Do you want to take a stab at how many top 6 weeks he has this year, Jordan? How many top 6 quarterback weeks? This is 10 games played.
2.
This is 2 top 6. 1. He has 1, and he has 4 inside the top 10. So he's had 1 game where, in essence, he has been better than almost anyone that could start against you. Other than that, you could be losing points at the quarterback position starting Lamar Jackson every given week in your league based on matchups. I mean, it's pretty, and he's got 1, 2, 3, he's got 5 weeks outside of the top 16. Actually, not even counting this week. I'm sure this week was beyond that too. So, I mean, he's forgettable, Jordan. That's where we are, forgettable. And yet everyone wants to fixate on Jonathan Taylor and 50 other players. But Lamar Jackson, I don't hear enough about. No. Not like, is he going to progress as a passer and do this or that? No, fantasy, brass tacks. How is he producing and impacting your team? Let's talk A-Warp. Not much. The point is not much beyond. Right. I mean, it's unbelievable that I'm not going to say he's getting a pass. I mean, he's still on a team that I actually think, aren't they actually the first team out right now in the playoffs? I mean, this has not gone to par. And the biggest thing for me would be the rushing. The fact that the rushing is down, you thought that would be something that outside of durability, you could hang your hat on for a while. I mean, I expected the passing. Now, to be fair, comparing to Josh Allen, so Josh Allen has one of the best slot guys in Cole Beasley, John Brown when healthy, and Stephon Diggs as a major addition. And you're saying that Lamar Jackson has Mark Andrews as the wide receiver 1, from the tight end position. And then Marquise Brown looks frustrated, like he wants the ball. And I don't even know how great he is when he gets the ball. So that's one thing. You've got Devin Duvernay playing meaningful snaps. That's not doing a whole lot as a receiver. You've got Miles Boykin, and you've got de facto veteran Willie Snead popping off every once in a while for a game because no one else is doing much of anything. So I'm not going to say the weapons are comparable, but Lamar Jackson certainly, like you kind of mentioned the ecosystem there. I mean, it's that basically they were rolling it back like whatever we did last year, yeah, we'll do that again. Like we're not trying. Like what did they actually do to improve this team? They doubled down with J.K. Dobbins. They doubled down and said, "Oh, we're going to do this with even more flex. Like if Mark Ingram takes a step back, we're going to be as good or even better because we've got now a young thoroughbred at 21 years old that can do this for the next 5 years." That's all well and good, but what if you have to pivot? What if at some point it comes down to the quarterback, which it invariably does? Anyway, but
yeah.
So it's a big thing about superflex drafts, and again, superflex is becoming commonplace, if not the norm, in dynasty leagues and drafts. And would you believe, Jordan, that this is before this past game, but it was after week 10, Lamar Jackson 107 superflex startup, QB3.
Who's ahead of him? Is it Kyler and Mahomes?
It's Mahomes and Murray. And then mid first, he got Lamar Jackson ahead of Herbert, Burrow, Watson, Wilson, Allen, everybody else, obviously.
We're gonna do this thing. We're gonna do the same thing all over again with Kyler Murray, right? Like that's what we're gonna do. Like this is where we're going. Right? We're gonna repeat ourselves. We're gonna do. We did it last year with Baker. We did it this year with Lamar Jackson. We're doing it next year with Kyler Murray.
I will say I trust Kyler Murray's passing to stabilize and be more. So I will say this. I have less of a problem with Kyler Murray at 102 than I did Lamar Jackson at 102. And this is not in hindsight. This is trust me, I drafted Lamar Jackson in 0, and I advised folks 0 times in that spot to draft Lamar Jackson. So, but I would be more comfortable. But what we always say, right? Unless they've done it, unless they have unequivocally proven themselves, you are tempting. It's like a moth to a flame. You are in danger of getting burned. Now, could it work out? It absolutely could work out. But the point is, why chance it? Why chance it? And I know, so Patrick Mahomes is the exception to because look at what he's dealing with. look at how his profile is different than Jackson and Murray's, which is notably different. Look at how his situation is different. Look at everything. But also, again, in general, I'll say this. I took Patrick Mahomes at 101 in a startup draft a couple years ago, but that was by default. That was because I tried to get whatever I deemed me when I'm, when the rest of my roster is built up, or, I can use, it just gives you flexibility to have that cornerstone anchor guy.
And he's going to bludgeon you. Like the thing about Mahomes is he's going to bludgeon people. It gives you so many options too. Like just in terms of you talk about an anchor, he gives you so many options to do other things, right? You can come back and double down, right? And go early at quarterback and just bludgeon people, or you can wait, right? You can kind of do a variety of different things. He's like the 3 in basketball. He cures so many ills in terms of he can just pour it in, and it's huge, right? So I mean, what's fascinating to me in this whole debate about quarterbacks is like you look at guys, right, like Kyler Murray. And maybe the answer is just going to, for the next like 5 years, is just going to be, all right, like, fine, we'll just take Deshaun Watson at cost, and someone else is always going to be sexier than he is, but he's probably over the next 5 years will be like one of the top 3 producers, right? And maybe that's just the answer, because
What's funny though is
happening every year.
What's funny is Houston's cap situation where they're going to need to get lean and mean, by the way, and that's actually good news for Watson, right? Because it's going to be all on him. Negative game script. Again, it might hurt this window where you would think that he might be contending to go to the Super Bowl. Probably isn't. But for fantasy, I mean, that's actually a good thing that he's going to be playing and freewheeling playmaker style, and they're going to, hopefully, keep some weapons around him, and start drafting some on low friendly deals, rookie deals and stuff like that. But yeah, it's interesting that it seems like every year there are big names that stand out with their profiles and that's what I was getting at, the whole, like, yes, Kyler Murray hasn't passed the threshold to say, oh yeah, lock and load, be comfortable with that guy taking him at his cost. And so that's the point. You don't need to because every year there's going to be 3, 4, 5+ guys at quarterback, especially, that just they should smack you in the face when you start looking at the whole combo of price and proven track record to say this is the, and it was Aaron Rodgers is now more expensive than he was a year ago. So the hand wringing, now he's going to go a little higher, which is almost unheard of for a guy of his age. But yet, it just shows how wrong the market was last offseason.
And the funny part about him is, like, you'll see people will say, "Oh, but he's been bad the last 2 years." Like, okay, like he was a top 12 finisher the last 2 years. Like
49 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. I wish I could be bad like that. Has any quarterback in a 2-year sample had almost a 10-to-1 ratio, and anyone has said he is bad? Ever in the history of the NFL, AFL, 1910 backyard league, did anyone ever flag football? Like, did anyone ever say that? Like, that's what I find hilarious. So he didn't throw 35 touchdown passes, I guess, to the same 2 interceptions. That would mean he justifies a top 40 startup pick. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess that's what it needed. Yeah. Jordan Love. Jordan Love scares everybody. That's what I'll say.
The make Aaron Rodgers mad selection narrative was pretty good. But yeah, I mean, I sort of look at these and I think that maybe I can get on board with Kyler being that expensive. But the funny part is like Kyler was like going this high last year, and all right, so he's the one that works out, right? But you sort of see there's been a whole group of these guys that haven't, right? That you were sort of
why
taking.
It's working. But I want to highlight for folks. So a big reason fantasy wise why it's working out is he's running a lot. So I want folks to remember that this is still, you're betting on a profile that, I mean, he's on pace to run for over 1,000 yards or right around there. And so it's largely that. And he has 10 rushing touchdowns, for goodness sake. Is that sustainable? I mean, so be careful of a quarterback, quote unquote, changing the game when they're doing it in this fashion. We've seen big rushing seasons before. We've seen for their career arc, big rushing players before. But just be careful, because especially rushing touchdowns for quarterbacks are highly volatile. So that would be the thing for me. And again, I really like Kyler Murray, and I'm saying this about a guy I really like. So just be careful, because the price point, and you play this out 100 times, and when you see, oh, well, Mahomes is gone, I'll just grab Kyler Murray. And I mean, how many times out of 100 does that difference of 1 pick or 2 picks or 1 quarterback slot mean a pretty big difference when you look back 5 years from now in terms of the stability? And also, to be frank, I mean, the number of top 2 or 3 seasons likely produced by each player. To me, that's a pretty big difference between QB1 and QB2, if that's how it lays out in drafts.
Yeah. And I think at that cost, you might as well just pay right? QB
to move up.
or pay to move up, or just wait, right? Because And this is the funny part about this position now. And I looked at this in the offseason last year. Like last year was the youngest that we had this century for top 6 and top 12 finishers at the quarterback position. Right? There wasn't a need to say, hey, I need to go young, so I have to take a shot on someone that hasn't done it. Right? It was absolutely unnecessary to do that because you had all these young options. And this year we're going to have it again. Right. In terms of, I haven't done the average out the ages yet, but you have guys like Josh Allen, you have guys like Dak Prescott, you have guys like Watson, right? And even Russell Wilson's not that old, right? So when you sort of look at these guys, there's not a ton of, right? I like Kyler Murray more than the other guys that have come before, but he's going to be the guy that I'm going to look at and I'm going to say, are we really going to bet on a quarterback to repeat 1,000-yard season? Because it hasn't happened. Right? Like, are we going to keep doing these? Are we going to keep betting on outliers at top 5 startup costs? I think that's you're trying to catch a falling knife, and it's just to me that's a clear avoid situation. You'd rather move up and take Mahomes, and I don't really move up in startup drafts.
Yep, I totally agree. You are listening to the Football Guys Dynasty Show, episode 30 with Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara. I want to remind you to subscribe, rate, and review to the Football Guys shows on all of your podcasting platforms. Sign up for the Football Guys daily email update delivered by Joe Bryant, your daily guide to all your news and instant analysis by going to footballguys.com/free. Easy address to remember there. We haven't done it in a few weeks, Jordan. Let's talk a few dynasty trades. We'll try to mix in some player evals, strategy points. Some trade deadlines are already passed. I was actually encouraged last week that only, maybe about 25% of my leagues had a firm and strict week 11 deadline. So I've still got every week now, I've got some dropping off, and a promising number actually that have no trade deadline, which I'm a proponent of, or, I think the minimum, maybe you cut it off right when the playoffs start. So that would be, after week 13 and before week 14 kickoffs in a majority of formats. So in a super flex format, we've got non-quarterbacks involved, but we have some picks. Mike Williams and a 4th for Laviska Shenault, currently absent, but should be back soon, maybe even this week, for Laviska Shenault, and a 3rd.
Man, it's I'll probably just take Mike Williams there. I don't think the picks do it too much. I'll take the higher pedigree guy with Mike Williams. Although I would say I'm pretty neutral on this. Actually, the more I sort of talk myself into this, I think that there's probably more of a. I think you're resetting the clock to some degree with Laviska Shenault, even though you don't have the same level of pedigree. Right. So you do have, I think, an uptick in value opportunity and maybe a full potential. Right. Yeah. At
this point, he's considered old news, or like, he's going to be a late, like, even if he pulls a Devontae Parker or something like that, the value spectrum is more limited on the top end by this age for him.
Yeah, and that's an extremely rare. Like Devontae Parker's the only person this century to do what he did, which is break out in year 5. So after not hitting in the first 4 years there, so it's a really rare thing to have happen that late for a round 1 guy. So it's a really rare career arc. So I think betting on that and using him as a proxy is pretty dangerous. Although Will Fuller might be there, but I think for different reasons you can justify that one. So yeah, I mean, I think Shenault, I would take Shenault here and reset. I think would be what my theory would be.
I'm going to tee you up with a softball right now. Okay. So I'm just going to let this ball float up into the orbit like there's no gravity and let you just hit it. It's going to seem like
is that the ball you're going to miss? This
is my 3 ball. This is This is like the tricolored ball in the 3-point contest. That's worth double. So that means I'm over 100 to start. All right. So this is going to be a softball strategy wise, but break it down for folks. This may be their first episode and they may not have listened to all 30, where we've probably talked about this concept in 10 to 15 of those shows. Josh Jacobs for a 21 first. That's likely a top 5 pick, and a 22 second.
When you get a player like Josh Jacobs, who has hit, as a 21-year-old first-round pick in the NFL draft and has hit for a top 24 season, that is amongst the most valuable types of players in all of Dynasty. That is a first-round startup pick. And what's interesting to me is he going to feel like this unsexy value thing, right? Are we going to do this on him where all these other guys get vaulted up and he's kind of like the Deshaun Watson of the quarterback, of the running back position, where he's been excellent and it's just people are going to overvalue him because he's not the next best thing, right? It kind of has that feel to me. But when you take this, when you get a profile like this, it is first round startup pick valuable and a top 5 pick in rookie drafts, right? When you have a running back this early in their career with this level of pedigree that is hit, that first round pick, you're just bleeding value trading it away for it. So I could justify trading away Josh Jacobs. To me, there's not many safer bets at the running back position to me at this point, right? Especially with McCaffrey off an injury and Barkley off an injury, and Zeke's a little bit older, right? I mean, even Swift was sort of trending in that direction pre-injury, right? There's not even Kamara, like we like Kamara, but he's aging, right? I mean, when you sort of look at it, Jacobs is uniquely situated as going to be a double hit guy at 23 years old and like not a ton of tread on the tire coming in, right? That's an incredibly valuable profile.
And on a team that wants to use him regularly and often.
Yeah.
And we're quibbling that he's not catching enough passes, but yet he's like a touchdown per game threat. So and a 20 touch player on a team that is kind of built around making sure they function that way. So you're saying if I were to theoretically see that a few picks before Josh Jacobs was Tua Tagovailoa in a Superflex startup, that would be bad process?
You're just hemorrhaging.
So that wouldn't be recommended.
That's no.
But Tua's proven. Did you see him that one game?
Yeah, I'll just say you're not proven until you actually hit an elite. Like I actually think Lamar Jackson's, to just round out, to sort of loop back and comp these two, I actually think Lamar Jackson's proven from a historical standpoint, right? Like when you get to the level that he got, your comps are really good historically going forward. But the problem is that people put too many quarterbacks in that category, right? So people are going to do that with Burrow, and he's not there yet.
Well,
right?
Yeah, everybody does it once, right?
We'll see on Herbert, but
Derek Carr's, MVP type season. Carson Wentz. You had Blake Bortles. His big season. You had Jameis Winston before the 30 for 30. I mean, it was years before that where he was going to be the next greatest. Marcus Mariota. Yeah. A lot of these guys, they got up to top 15, top 18 startup in Superflex. And, we're not hitting a very good average by betting on all those guys.
No.
All right.
You're better off to take unsexy at the quarterback position, right? Like that's just just steady Eddie.
Regardless of the price, right? And like you want to be in that range, go unsexy Russell Wilson. You want to be in that range, take unsexy Dak Prescott. How about you just wait though? You could also, if you want to go completely unsexy, make sure they will definitely be unsexy when you go 3, 4, 5 rounds after that, like Ryan Tannehill and Derek Carr's unsexy. Kirk Cousins definitely unsexy. Nothing sexy about that pick of all. Not one person in the chat is going to go, "Oh, you sniped me. Oh, great pick." They're going to be like, "You killed your team." You're like, "I got a starting quarterback with a profile in round 8." You're right. All right. Next trade, we've got Mark Andrews for. Oh, this isn't a good trade. Never mind. There was another one. Oh, here we go. Saquon Barkley for James Robinson and Robert Woods.
Yeah. So
like Robert Woods.
I do like Robert Woods. I'll say this. I think James Robinson, this is an outstanding rookie season for him coming from where he came from. I'll just say it's a pretty, he's going to be a fascinating value in the offseason. Barkley wins this deal, but I do think Robinson's going to be a fascinating guy in the offseason because you're going to get him with a really high finish. in a range of guys that have better pedigree than him, but have some questions. And so it's going to be a really interesting, like he's going to be a really interesting one. I will say in terms of, we don't have a huge sample on UDFAs for running backs hitting, but I will say
he's going to be a guy that if he works out, and by works out, I mean, even if he kind of does what he did this year, next year, because he's going to be priced at, I'll be interested in his redraft price point. I'm sure that will be a little bit higher than his startup draft valuation, but he's going to be one that people are going to point to, be like, see, I told you, you should always, like if you believe in a guy, then you should always bet on them, even if everyone's telling you to sell. Like he's going to be that example in 5-10 years that's pulled out. And if he doesn't work out, it's going to be all, the historics and the raw probabilities. And even though, what I always do in my metric and historical grounded probability spectrum and valuation system and all this stuff is trust me, I have moved him up. I have moved him up significantly. I have shifted probabilities because you're operating from a different perspective than just a player that might be a 5, 6, 7% hit rate guy coming from where he did, even though I like the profile. So we're obviously moving in a big direction beyond that. But there's a huge difference between moving him up from there and being where the market is right now. So it's going to be interesting to see. And again, unless you really like him, I'll say this, unless you really like him, you're going to find it very cost prohibitive. Like you're not going to have any new shares of him in 2021 because you're going to, again, if you came with a skeptical eye with him back in September or October or right now before your trade deadline, then I think if you're building a team from scratch and you're like, well, I got to draft him in the 3rd round or 4th round, you're not going to be hip to that. And so it's pretty much a non-issue. We always say this about rankings and valuations. I mean, as long as if you're below a certain point on a player, it's immaterial how far below because you have 0 shares and you will acquire 0. So it doesn't, like, to be fair, it doesn't matter. Like, let's say I'm just eyeballing, what is he running back? Is it 15 or so? I don't know, like in the teens. Yeah. If you have him at running back, let's say he's in that zone. If you have him at running back 20 or you have him at running back 96, it really doesn't matter. Right. All it means is you won't have him. And that's why people always pick on somebody like, oh my God, you have so-and-so wide receiver 45. It's like, well, what do you care? Like to be fair, all I'm saying is sell him or don't acquire him. It's all I'm saying. But obviously, the farther down it is, the more graphic the recommendation I would be making for that is. But, and if you have a guy high, it's like, I can't believe you have, I can't believe you have Antonio Gibson running back 5 in Dynasty. It's like, well, I'm telling you, I think he's valued higher than the market should be. And I'm saying, based on this, or whatever bullet point or note I have on there, that, here's where he should be. And if it's running back 12 is the consensus, if you have him at 10 or 5, it's saying I like him. I like him more than the average person out there or the average ranker, drafter, etc. So that's all it really means, just to put that point on this. Do you have anything else to add on just rankings in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in like Lamar Jackson. I had him at quarterback 4 in the offseason, right? It didn't 4 or 20. It didn't really matter. I wasn't going to get him. Right?
Yeah, 4 you weren't getting him, right?
Right. It wasn't going to happen. I'll say this with Robinson, I have some prior research that I've done. There's been 21 running backs, UDFA running backs that have hit for a top 24 season. 10 of them have been one hit wonders. Another 5 have hit an additional one time. And then you get some right tail guys who have hit multi times, but so 50-50. But I'll say this in terms of, in Robinson's defense, prototypical and young for a hit. So this isn't like a 4th year guy who just stumbles into a job, right? He's actually, I mean, we'll see in terms of locked in terms of how much can a UDFA truly be locked in. Well, he should be as locked in to a starting job as a UDFA can possibly be outside of injury. And what I would say with him is, I think that this is a situation for him. He can maintain a job as long as it's going good, right? Once it goes bad, and we sort of see it like with Minshew and some of these other guys, right? Once it goes bad,
you have zero wiggle room.
Sure, exactly. So, and even
You're
though
not
we can say
insulated
running
like
back
a first
don't matter,
rounder or even a day 2 guy. Like that's
right.
the biggest part of, I mean, not the biggest part. I mean, obviously it is a proxy for talent and sort of how did you get to this point, sort of, you know, in a big picture way. But it also is, I mean, again, if you are kind of struggling through things like Ronald Jones, right? Not the cleanest career start, and a number of players that, like a day 2 running back, you get some wiggle room and some latitude. And a UDFA, I mean, like you said, you got to do enough to earn it and stay on the job. And, you know, if you bounce around, you can bounce around 3-4 times and truly never really get a big shot, you know, and all of a sudden there's five other UDFAs that are as good as you are, you know, the next off season. And so you just don't have that same sort of security for multiple chances, is what I would say. And James Robinson has dropped off a little bit. Now, Jacksonville is an absolute S show. So keep that in mind that, I mean, situation is not working for him. And the big games have all been clustered. You know, the last 3-4 weeks have been very pedestrian. But again, he has the job. Do you have offhand? I guess I should have did this so you could flip through your research and you know, while I was vamping there a little bit. But what would be the I use the phrase survivorship. So what would be the survivorship for, even if you don't say UDFA, let's say round 6-7 type running backs?
Oh, that's a good question.
And do you do it by really year, or do you say just overall for like 2-3 seasons or something?
I do a couple of I did a couple of seasons. I did let's see. So survivorship, I did 1 and 3.
Okay. So this first one, so the first one, like let's assume even if it's day 3, something like that, whatever.
So we'll use like all right. So round 6 guys, for example, survive 55% of the time.
Okay.
So that means they go the next year without a team drafting someone with higher pedigree.
So it's close to 50-50.
No, it's close to 50-50. And just by way of reference, I mean, it's 100% in round 1, 95 in round 2, 87 in round 3. So we're really talking like it's pretty high. And then so when you get into 3 years, so I looked at a 1 and a 3-year window. In 3 years, again, up at the top, it's really rare. 93% of round 1 guys survive, and then for round 2 guys, it's 73%. So we actually had Kerryon Johnson fall into that this year as being the 24% there. So he's actually he was an outlier. But when you look and sort of go way down in pedigree, I mean, round 6 guys, 15% of the time, they survive 3 years without better competition. And then round 7 guys, for example, it's 8%. And then sort of, and then obviously in between, it's pretty linear there in between. So, and actually the funny part is like, when you look at, is it 1 or is it more than 1? So, 38% of the time, for example, round 7 guys have 2 guys drafted ahead of them in the next 3 years. And then it's even actually 12% have 3 or more. So, excuse me. So 38% have 2 drafted with superior pedigree, and 12% of the time it's actually 3 or more. So there is a risk there, but I will say, like, when you look at the guys who have survived, it's the guys that have hit and that have developed a job early on.
Right. I would say this. Here would be my 2 things. Number 1 is, so you have a team that has a depth chart that here would be one of my biggest concerns. You almost wish that the depth chart beyond James Robinson was better.
Yes.
If you want him to, because you look at this and you say, Chris Thompson, okay, he's a later career Jag and he couldn't stay healthy this year. And then you have Divine Ozigbo with no pedigree as well. And Raquel Armstead, again, will he be back and what's his situation? So they basically have nothing. They have nothing on the depth chart, which means they need to fill out a depth chart. And we've seen before, I mean, we've seen other teams that, hey, now what I always say is wait till the offseason and that team will tell you what they really feel about players, because they have a chance to fix things, improve things, bolster positions. And we saw it even, Kansas City, right? Oh, let's add Le'Veon Bell. Tampa Bay, let's add Leonard Fournette. I mean, those are two guys that are available this coming off season as examples. Not saying that they're going there or anything, but just so you have Chris Carson, James Conner, Todd Gurley,
Kenyon Drake, right?
Yeah, Kenyon Drake, Aaron Jones could be getting paid big money to go somewhere. Mike Davis, so you have to go down the line and say this is not even. So you're strictly talking the NFL draft, and it's harder to track. Who was signed as free. That's much harder information to track down, and so that's only one part of the equation of the off season. So the first data point is Robinson has to survive free agency. I just named some of the higher level guys, but what level concerns you? And the problem with a UDFA is the line is a lot lower than, a day 2 guy, right? I mean, if you have Kerryon Johnson, let's play this situation out differently. Kerryon Johnson, but then they bring in, I'm thinking of like a free agent. They bring in Brian Hill, this coming off season. Does that scare you? No. Do they bring, if they bring in Carlos Hyde, is it concerning? A little bit, so that's beyond the NFL draft. But if you're James Robinson, does Carlos Hyde concern you? Does Kenyon Drake concern you? Jamal Williams, Mike Davis? I mean, the point is there's more than 3 or 4 guys that should be like, well, this changes some things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good. The point is you're going to be kind of looking over your shoulder through the NFL draft, right? So it's going to be free agency. And then it's going to be the NFL draft, but then it's until what round? Until what player, threshold is gone. There's a lot more of that than other players in this. Can I survive this first off-season threshold? That's one of the biggest things. So even if Robinson works out, he could work out, but it's in a roundabout way. Like they actually brought in stiff competition. And then this is almost the, stiff. This would be like, I'm trying to think. So this would be like Damian Williams if he didn't opt out, where they draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but then Edwards-Helaire, I don't know, gets in the doghouse or gets hurt or something, and Damian Williams ends up being the correct answer this year. Like you kind of, it's sort of the process versus results thing, right? So if Robinson actually does face heavy competition through the draft or free agency, but then that player ends up not working out to some level, and Robinson ends up being the correct answer, did he survive or not survive? You see what I'm saying with this? Like,
right.
It kind of said everything you need to say, the fact that he didn't. So that would be the final point I would put on this, is that as a UDFA, he did whatever you wanted to do this year, but I still think there's going to be that look over your shoulder factor in the offseason, that it's not going to go away January 17th or March 7th. It's going to extend all the way through late April. Yeah. And we saw this year with Le'Veon Bell, Leonard Fournette.
In August.
Go on all the way into August. Devonta Freeman. I mean, it can keep going. It can keep going all the way till week 1, because we might see cuts and caps and teams moving on and pivoting, just like we saw this year.
Absolutely. You're never. The one thing I'll say about these guys, and the Damian Williams, Raheem Mostert, right? Those guys, you never feel great about it, right? Like it might be high upside, but you never feel great about the survivor rate. And I'll just say that, like, I think what you will have is a persistent discomfort with rostering someone like James Robinson,
even if it works out. And we didn't even get into the price point, which is pretty prohibitive. Like I said, 3rd, 4th round of Superflex, and obviously you move that up in non-Superflex formats. All right, so busy episode. Started out Lamar Jackson, actually moved on, talked about Josh Allen and about the process, and James Robinson is another good, how do you view this situation, and something I'm sure we'll reference in the years to come and you kind of have to address that in any outlier situation. Is you either got to be in and you're betting on the outlier, or you're taking a more measured approach and you're saying, whether it works out and he is the true outlier or not of a given subset of time, there's a lot of concern there. So we broke down all those things. We talked a couple different trades and processes there. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Dynasty leagues.